Hi, my name is Arjun and welcome to ENERGIZE, the tech revolution. Today we are thrilled to welcome Mohamed EL-MANSI, a seasoned expert in the nuclear energy sector and the current manager of advanced inspection and maintenance at Ontario Power Generation. Mohammed's journey in the nuclear field began with a strong academic foundation, holding both a bachelor's and a master's degree in nuclear engineering. Over the years, he has built an impressive career, moving from hands on field operations and engineering roles to leadership positions in project and portfolio management. With deep knowledge in nuclear technology, operational safety, and innovative maintenance practices, Mohammed is now responsible for overseeing advanced inspection and maintenance processes at OPG. His insights are invaluable for understanding not only the technical complexities of nuclear energy, but also the future of this industry in a rapidly changing energy landscape. Mohammed, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Arjun, for having me. It's a pleasure being with you.
Absolutely, Mohammed. So, Mohammed, you have a bachelor's and a master's degree in nuclear engineering. What is it that excited you about nuclear engineering that led you to pursue an education in this field?
My love for nuclear actually came in grade in high school, connecting math and physics together, where I was really fond of how the different theories in physics was really uh, very relevant to what we see on a day-to-day basis. And growing into it, I believe high school teachers have a huge impact on our life decisions, especially when we're trying to choose a career when we're like teenagers. So speaking to my high school teachers, I was very close to the physics teacher, and he had recommended nuclear as one of the sectors. And when I was doing my campus tours, grade 11 and 12, the campus, I really fell in love with the campus for University of Ontario. It was very secluded, very peaceful. We were the first class, very close to get to know the professors and get to know the staff in the university. So I really felt that I belonged there. And that's how I started my career back in 2003.
That's great to hear, Mohammed. So, in terms of your professional journey, you started off in nuclear field operations, and then you moved into nuclear lead engineer, and then you held various leadership positions in portfolio and project management, and now you're a manager in OPG. Could you share what exactly is the role of a nuclear lead engineer?
Sure. So typically inside the nuclear station, there's multiple systems inside each station. So you'll have the fire system, you'll have you name it. There is so many systems that you would have to be responsible for. So a nuclear lead engineer, he would typically own a system. And what I mean owning the system is you would be responsible for that system, the troubleshooting, the maintenance, any updates that needs to happen, if there was any work that needs to be done on the system or close by, you would have to provide your feedback and input. So you would pretty much take on a system, you would understand the drawing, you understand the calculations, you would pretty much own it and you would be the subject matter expert. And there will be a rotation where you would get to own a system for a few years and then you move on to different system for you to continue your learning journey from one station or one subsystem to the next.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mohammed. So, could you share more about your current role as a manager in OPG?
Yeah, so in OPG, we have multiple departments. It's a huge company, and they do have different portfolio. Within the department I'm in, we're responsible for all the advanced inspection and maintenance that happen across Ontario Power Generation. And the fleet is very wide. It's not just nuclear, we also have renewable generation, which are hydro station, or we even service other utilities within Ontario and outside of Ontario in different provinces and sometimes overseas. So the department is split across multiple departments, and each department has a sector that they would be responsible for. The department I am responsible for is all the reactor maintenance. So we really specialize in maintaining the reactor from a nuclear point of view. So we take on a lot of specialized tasks that would have to work with aging plants either inside Canada or outside of Canada. As you know, Canadians haven't really built a nuclear station since the 80s. So all our plants are aging and they're going through a refurbishment stage at the moment. So in Pickering and Darlington are almost done with their life extension. So they've reached a point where they had to make a decision whether or they would continue operations. And for that to happen, you would have to consider the aging components that you have, and then you would have to either replace it or do an assessment to understand where it's at and how much life expectancy would you be able to operate the station with. So they've done that. They've done that study, and they worked on the equipment that needs to be replaced. And we're doing a similar exercise right now in Pickering. So throughout the period, we had been working with very aging plants inside Canada, and I think now they're seeing the need for more power or more energy required. And when I say more power, the need is for clean energy, meaning we would need to be net zero. And nuclear really comes in forefront of that. So we again, we specialize again in many main components inside the nuclear station. Most of it is fuel channel. So we focus a lot on fuel channel. Fuel channels are the component that would have fuel, and it sees a lot of high pressure and high heat. So there is degradation process that happens, and it gets through a lot of cycles, whether it goes up and down, and that imposes a lot of risk on the component. So we would have to inspect those components on a regular basis, and then we would have to service the station. Typically comes in an outage almost once in the spring and once in the fall, and we typically are very busy around those times, servicing many groups within Ontario Power Generation.
Thank you for sharing, Mohammed. Now, just to understand a bit more about the nuclear energy landscape in Canada, could you share how many nuclear plants currently exist in Canada, and what is the typical cost of building such a plant?
That's cost is very dependent on how much energy and how much power are you producing. But I'll give you a quick landscape. So we had started building nuclear plants in Canada back in the 70s, and we even had research reactors in the 60s and the 50s. The 70s, and when I want to say there was a nuclear boom of how much power plants were being operated. So at Bruce Power or Bruce County, we have 8 units. We have Bruce A and Bruce B, and each sub or Bruce A would have 4 units, Bruce B would have another 4 units. And then we move into Pickering, and Pickering had one of the earlier stations. So they would have Pickering, there is Pickering A and a Pickering B. And Pickering A would be the same thing, would be a 4-unit station. And then Pickering B would be another 4-unit station. So between Pickering and Bruce Power, we have roughly 16 stations. And then there was another 4 units that were built at Darlington near Bowmanville, 4 stations that were built in the 80s. And those are the ones that have just gone through the refurbishment on the life extension that I've mentioned before. So that's mainly within Ontario. Those are the power plants that produce electricity, and that's what we rely on to have our base load in Ontario. If you go outside of Ontario, you have New Brunswick, and you have G2. G2 was in Quebec, and in Point La Pro in New Brunswick, we had another nuclear station. So those were the other 2 stations within Canada. And if you were to, and all those stations were done with a Canadian design and a Canadian system that's very unique to the landscape here in Canada. So the supply chain was very localized. I think back in the time, there was an emphasis on making sure your supply chains are very local. You're designing the station based on the local requirement and the local landscape of what you need. As the time had progressed after that, there has been, I want to say, an acceptance of us going outside of our comfort zone and relying on supply chain worldwide. So we had, at the moment, we're getting ready to build another 4, they call them SMR, which is small modular reactor. It's a completely different design than what we've built in the past in Canada. And they're mainly a brand new design that's being built for the first time ever. And when I say the first time ever, not just in Canada or North America, it's around the globe. They're GE design, they're being designed here in Canada. And the idea is we will be the entrepreneurs that we would operate those stations worldwide, and we would export that knowledge across the globe.
Oh, very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing, Mohammed. Now, could you dive deep into, the type of technologies and major pieces of equipment that exist in a typical nuclear plant? And if you can walk us through step by step, or what is the process flow of a nuclear plant?
Sure. I think the easiest way to explain this is if you were to go back in time for the Revolution, where we had required a huge amount of power required, and back in the time we used to produce steam, and that steam would rotate a turbine, and the turbine would rotate and generate electricity. So that main source of power have changed and moved from one source to the next as the time has progressed. So I think we started first with coal. Coal was very dirty. It had a huge environmental effect. And then we moved into different multiple sources until we reached nuclear. So if you were to compare the power that comes out of nuclear compared to other sources, whether it's natural gas, oil, coal, you will see there is a significant improvements in how much efficiency nuclear is able to produce if you were to compare it against other sources of power or other sources that we can rely on to produce that much electricity. And that really comes down to if you were to compare the megawatt that gets produced from nuclear compared to oil or gas or coal, it's roughly but 15 to 20% of cost. So if you were to look at the electricity rates here in Ontario, because we depend heavily on nuclear as a base load, it's a lot cheaper compared to other provinces. And that really is a lead factor when it comes to like the power required for factories or big sources that requires a huge amount of energy to keep producing. So that really comes in handy when investors are looking in or business owners are looking to where to invest. That's why Ontario typically attracts a lot of businesses mainly for that reason, because we have a cheap source of electricity that's available to us.
Thank you, Mohammed. Now, the nuclear industry is a high-stake environment with investment and safety being paramount. What sort of measures are in place to ensure safety measures to ensure that accidents don't happen in a nuclear plant? And given that you're such a successful leader, a leader in this nuclear space, how do you manage such high-stake projects in terms of, keeping your team motivated in such high-pressure environments?
Yeah, so we typically operate with three C's principle. Three C's mean you keep the reactor cool, so you're maintaining the heat or the heat that's being produced. You're maintaining that cycle, so you have to produce or provide enough water to provide to take on that heat. So cool, contain, and make sure we are able to contain. So there's a huge containment building that we have within the nuclear power plant that are able to contain anything that will happen inside the nuclear plant. But it's mainly the safety principle that's been engraved over the years within OPG and within any nuclear power plant in general. There's so many lessons learned that gets shared between the different utilities that really affects how we operate those plants, and we typically rely on many redundant safety systems are there in place, and we rely on the operation excellence. So meaning when we operate the unit, if the requirement or if this design factor is 100%, we typically operate much less than that envelope. And we make sure when we're providing or changing any parameters, those parameters have been revised and they've been calculated and they've been inspected to ensure we are still operating within the safety parameters we're operating within. Within that parameter, we have a watch honestly, a regulator that operates completely independent, and that regulator behaves like a watchdog. So making sure we are operating safely, so they have a full visibility on what each utility does, what failures are they seeing, what incidents is happening, what's the behavior is like, and is there any red flags that needs to be put up. So that's even another layer of oversight. However, the design is built in a way where if you were to let it fail, it would automatically shut down. So and that's really the beauty of a Canadian design, is it's always, if there was anything were to happen, it would automatically shut down on its own without any human intervention. So you would have to make sure you're always operating within the safety parameters. And if those safety parameters are not met, then it automatically shuts down.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Mohammed. Now, with digitalization coming into prominence, cyber attacks can become a major problem. What sort of safety measures are in place to ensure cyber threats don't happen or cyber attacks don't happen? And how has this process evolved over time?
I want to say, like, we have seen a huge improvements in our cybersecurity. I feel like OPG and all the utilities that operate here in Canada have implemented many safety measures in place to ensure they are operating safely. However, it's not just the operation; it's also controlling and containing your IP. So there's so many systems that happen, like they are protected by design, just because they have like companies have invested so much money and time into them, and it, when we are when we work within our utilities, we are we typically get onboarded, and during the onboarding process, we're gone through a rigor security or cyber security of what to do and what not to do, and that's typically gets refreshed almost on an annual basis. The main and then as we are operating, we typically have an IT a specialist that we can always refer to. So, and those IT specialists are always available if we have any questions. However, when you operate inside, you do have a very tight controls of measures of what you can do and what you can't do. And you have to understand there is always safety protocols are there in place. And those safety protocols are always being updated on a regular basis to ensure we're always protected. There has been if there has been any incidents, it typically gets flagged up to your supervisors, and there has been a routine, I want to say routine testing within the environment of any work to ensure employers are really adhering to the safety measures that are there in place. It's always it'll always be like an evolving cycle. It will never be 100%, but it's always step perfection or aiming to be as perfect as you can to ensure you're staying within the safety parameters that were there in place.
Thanks, Mohammed. Now, with artificial intelligence and machine learning coming into the prominence in the energy sector over the last few years, how is AI apart from inspection? How is AI being used in predictive maintenance and operational efficiency in the nuclear space? And can you share an example of how AI had a big impact?
I think we operate in an environment where it's very rich in data. We've been operating since the 70s, and we have multiple stations. As I said, within Ontario, we have 16 stations that are operational. And then we also share lesson learned across the different fleets. So within the Canadian design, we have stations that have been built in China, stations that are built in Argentina, stations that have been built in Romania, Korea. So we collectively all share our data and lesson learned of how can we ensure our operations remain safe. So that's number one, is we typically share all that data. That data gets I think OPG have seen a significant advancement in AI, meaning going through the data and understanding what priorities needs to be there in place. So filtering through the data at the moment and able to navigate through the lesson learned when you're planning a new project or a new update or an activity that's being happening in the field, navigating through that database and just getting a quick feedback to the engineer or to the operator on what to watch for, what other failures have they seen in the past, and navigating through that huge database is something significant. And we've seen that data is now being materialized through AI, where AI is navigating through the different failure points that had happened in the past, and then collectively reading out to you what are some of the risks that you should take into consideration when you're planning new activities that are similar to things that happened in the past. So that's number one. Number two is we have to also, as we're planning outages, as I told you, we have outages that happen on a regular basis, and we've seen a typical shift in activities almost a season, like almost from one unit to the next, where the reason is almost consistently the same. So by understanding how other outages have been shifting for multiple reasons, we typically aggregate those reasons in a database and understand how can we, when we're planning work in the future, how can we plan like I don't want to say a perfect outage, but an outage that's being optimized and considering the financial dollar value that comes with every outage. We're almost anywhere between 1.5 million to 2 million on a day by day if we were to save. So if we were to save just like 2 days, we were saving about 3 million, right? So we look at a 60 or a 90-day outage, and we're looking at very fine in the very fine details. How can we optimize the outage to ensure we are able to deliver the best efficiency out of a station, so it comes back online, and then we're able to produce electricity back to the ratepayer.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Mohammed. Now, could you expand upon whether nuclear energy truly is a low carbon alternative to fossil fuels?
I think that question is very debatable, and it's been debated for many years. If you were to look at um, what outputs are you producing when you're operating a nuclear station, it might guide you to the right place. So in a nuclear station, you typically don't have any greenhouse gas effects, right? So you don't have anything that would really harm the environment. And we've seen a station that's been operating for many years in Pickering, and it's been very, honestly, environment friendly to the neighbors around it, and we've seen a very strict control outputs from that station. Most important, the acceptance of having a nuclear station in your neighborhood has been widely accepted now. And now we're operating with a different mindset, where in the past we used to rely on big power plants that would deliver enough output for like a city of Toronto. But we don't have, especially in Canada, we don't have a city of Toronto like every like 100 kilometers. We have a lot of remote communities that we have to deliver power to. So the fact is now we are moving into a mindset of delivering a very small reactors that can be placed in small communities that can rely heavily on that power to survive and live and maintain their regular activities. But at the same time, when we design it, we have to make sure it's safe. They're not, and there's no gases being released. There's no radiations being released. It's contained. It's safe to operate, and we're even more considering an option of operating those stations remotely. So there would be almost be like a control system, and that control system would control multiple stations across Canada or across a province. So for us to consider downsizing the reactor and moving them into remote areas, we would have to ensure when we're designing them, they're being very safe to the environment and being very safe from a greenhouse emission point of view. Obviously, the questions comes back to waste, right? Like what happens when waste come out? We've been able to optimize waste in many different ways. First, we do a lot of segregations based on the waste. However, there has been many advancements over the past 10 years that we're able to find medium and long-term solution to the fuel that's being spent. But more importantly, we're able now to consider a different design of the nuclear station, where we're able to use that used fuel into another cycle. So we're almost recycling the used fuel that we have to get another more megawatt out of it. So that the life of fuel now is being optimized to the power of two, where you're able to consider many different designs to keep reusing that fuel to ensure you're able to minimize your waste as much as you can.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Mohammed. Let's shift our conversation now towards a career skill standpoint of view. In terms of careers and functional roles that currently exist in the nuclear space, what type of digital roles exist? Are there specific roles such as digital project manager, digital program manager, digital product manager? Would love to know more on that.
I want to say, typically in our industry, uh, it's like there's a huge gap when it comes to product management. Like we've been operating um, old school for such a long time. Maybe up until like maybe 10 years ago is when I started to hear digitalization. I remember my first supervisors was telling me on day one, so that was back in 2007, is don't change anything. You use what you're used to and don't change the process. So coming into it with like a fresh mind and trying to challenge the process to be more efficient and get away from paper copies. And I think COVID had a huge impact because it was very disruptive to our industry. We used to be like very face to face. We used to not rely on Teams. Now, even with Teams and in the same room, they're still using Teams. They're still sharing screens. They're like so that has shifted a lot. So I think the utilities now are understanding the need for digitalization, and there has been a big drive in the industry to move towards that, and not just move. So especially in maintenance, I've seen where we used to do a lot of preventative maintenance, and preventive maintenance would step in before the failure happened. Now, having sensors and AIs and able to take that information and understand exactly when the failure is going to happen and then do the maintenance right before, those data are invaluable. And then trying to take what you're doing in the field and connecting that to a laptop and a screen and making sure you're able to connect all the dots. That's when the digitalization efforts has to happen. And I've sat in a meeting for our AI committee within OPG, and I know there's so much efforts to ensure there's a digitalization efforts are being almost now we're trying with a race to come back and catch what we missed over the past 10-15 years, because I feel for the nuclear industry they've been trying to operate very safely, and that has almost stopped our thoughts of being innovative, catching up to what our digital standards should be as of now. And then look at other industries like oil and gas, where I want to say the safety barriers might be a bit lower than nuclear, mainly for public perception, but they're able to change, and the work environment is a lot easier compared to changing work environments in nuclear. And last but not least, it's also changing the culture, like changing the culture of understanding there is a better way to do it and there's an efficient way to do it, and that's really happening a lot now through the young generation that's joining our workforces on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Now, in terms of somebody who's looking to establish a leadership position in the nuclear industry, what sort of soft skills and technical skills would you recommend they build upon? And how have you mastered these skills over the course of your career?
So I hired a lot through my journey, and typically when I hire, I don't hire for knowledge. I don't really care if the question to the answers I'm asking in an interview are the right answers or no. I care if that personality is able to adjust, able to tweak, able to learn and listen as they're going through their different stages of their life. As we have different personalities on the team, the most important trait that I've seen over the years is to reflect on what other people are saying to you and making sure that you're able to understand. And active listening is a strong muscle that we all need to practice. And active listening is a third level of listening, where you're able to listen, comprehend, and then reflect, and then now you are able to respond back. And I feel if we collectively, if I'm working with a personality that's able to adjust, able to tweak, able to change and adapt for the environment they're in, that will be probably the number one trait. And number two is not just the ability to advance, but it's the ability to mentor others, especially the young folks around you. If people are able to see you as a leader, you have to act like a leader, right? So by mentoring young people that come into the workforce or people that might need a little bit of guidance, people typically appreciate that a lot. And I've always said I've left the job for a boss, but or I left or I stayed in a job for a boss. So it really the impact on those around you and those who are working with you are significant because they're either can make you or break you. And if you're able to, as a leader, if you're able to establish a safe work environment, meaning you're able to give the floor for others around you to talk, express their needs, express their point of view, and really take it as yes, it means a lot by giving them the floor and give it and empowering those around you. So I would say listening, empowering, and the ability to change and be adaptable to the work conditions around you.
Very, very sound advice, Mohammed. So thank you so much. And that concludes the formal portion of our interview for today. We like to end our podcast with a fun segment called a rapid fire, where our viewers and listeners get to learn a little bit about the personal side of our guests. So as part of this rapid fire, I'll be asking you three quick questions. So are you ready?
I am, yes.
Great, Mohammed. So firstly, as a tech podcast, would love to hear what's a favorite app or hardware product that you enjoy using?
I don't know about enjoying, but I use it a lot. I use Teams a lot. So I almost live on Teams where you're either connecting through calls, you're chatting, you're looking for someone's phone number, or you're calling someone, or someone is calling you. So I use Team a lot. I don't know if that's something good or bad, but I also outside of work, I also coach, and I use an app called TeamSnap. And TeamSnap is a really good app because it has many things built into one app where it has a schedule, has a chat, you can put your availability in. So that's outside of work, but I think within work, I love Teams, or I have to say I love Teams because it's probably the most app I use a lot.
Great, great, Mohammed. So secondly, what's a book that you've read that has had a big impact on your life and why?
Oh, so that book, the book I'm about to mention, is almost it's my Christmas reading book, and it's a book I always read because it feels like I'm watching a movie. And that book is called Never Split the Difference. It's a negotiation book. Was wrote by an FBI agent that moved from that hostage environment into the business world, and it really catch my attention because I think the first like chapter he talks about MBA students that he ripped them apart, and I was like, what? How can you rip an MBA student that finished a negotiation course? And he comes in with a different mentality. And what I really love about his book is before he talks about the principle, he tells you the story that really happened in real life. So it almost feels like watching a movie. You're visualizing what happened in that scene, and you can relate to something that really happened in real life, right? And then through the scenario or through what happened, you're able to, yes, to understand that he's really delivering the point. So I would really recommend people to listen to it. It's available on Audible. I wasn't really a much of a reader. I do a lot of audiobooks, and I do have a long drive every day, so I use that drive to listen to podcasts and listen to audiobooks as much as I can.
Great, Mohammed. Thank you so much for sharing that. And lastly, do you have any final words of wisdom, perhaps a short story, perhaps a quote for members of our audience?
I want to say people will always challenge will always try to put you in a box and will always try to frame you. Your real challenge is to ensure that you can grow outside of that box. And we do that many times, whether we go through, like when we were young, we used to go to school every day to get more education, get better. We finished, we went to university, but the learning didn't really stop there. And as we have gone through our undergrad, I think now there is more need to have a master's or a PhD. But more importantly, I feel the knowledge is available out there. So if you're really after the knowledge could be for free. Like you have so many platforms right now where you're able to grasp the knowledge. And even with AI, that knowledge can be even extracted for you, right? So I want to say you always have to be up on your toe, learn something new every day, connect to those around you, and making sure you're leaving good memories, and have, especially at work, at a working level, you have to make sure you're impacting someone's life in a positive way every day if you can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mohammed. So that concludes our rapid fire and our interview for today. What's the best way for our viewers and listeners to get in touch with you?
So I'm available on LinkedIn, and if you need to get in touch with me, I believe all my information is there. If you are looking for my personal email, I can we could probably include it in the description of this podcast. But I'm always available online, and if people wants to connect with me, I'm easily accessible.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you very much for, no, for being on the show. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure having you. And thank you so much for sharing your subject matter expertise in the nuclear energy industry. And we wish, from the team at Energize, wishing you and the entire team at OPG lots of growth and lots of success.
Thank you so much, Arjun. Really appreciate this podcast. It was a pleasure
Absolutely.
having you. Thanks.
Absolutely, Mohammed. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, our episode for today. And remember, you're one product away from transformation. I'm Arjun Chaudhary.